But again, well, thank you all again. Welcome. Good afternoon now. We appreciate you joining us here for the August virtual luncheon of the KC Downtowners. My name is Stan Myers. I'm the president of the KC Downtowners this year. My day job, I work for Terracon as a client development manager here in Kansas City. And many of you might be joining us for the first time. If so, welcome. Just a reminder here that the KC Downtowners is an informal association of Kansas Cityans who live, work, and or play in downtown Kansas City. And our mission is that we are dedicated to downtown development and to promoting a positive community spirit. It's really as simple as that. And today is really exciting because we've got, I think, a bit of an unusual program from what we've normally done. And that begins with our sponsor for the month of August. Esteemed Village is a nonprofit that is here in the Kansas City community and led by Executive Director William Wells. William joins us today, and I'm going to step aside now and turn this over to you, William, and educate all of us on what Esteemed Village is and what you do here in Kansas City.
Okay, thank you, Stan. Thank you, everybody, for having me. My name is William Wells. I'm the Executive Director of Esteemed Village. We are located at 1600 Upper Sale, right across the street from the Royals Academy and just north of the Urban League. I see Ms. Black is on the call. How you doing? We started out, we've been operating since 2014. We are science, technology, engineering, arts, and math program after school and in school. We provide STEM electives to Guadalupe centers, but we're not a school. We're glad to say that we're not a school. We are focusing on engineering, computer science, IT, and you may have seen we had middle school, high school students do a lot of building information modeling, community action planning, over the past year and a half with UMKC. And we have now pivoted and we're working with the city to deploy broadband and digitally transform the 3rd district and get the citizens working on education, workforce development, business development, and infrastructure. We're very excited about that. We were told by the big three, cable, telephone, and the other big provider, that they couldn't provide service to us. We were originally in the Lincoln building, and when we moved around the corner from that 1,000 square foot room to our 20,000 square foot facility, we decided, well, if you can't get it to us, we'll get it ourselves. My background is telecom and telecommunications engineering. And so we have a full gig up and full gig down data center and network in the basement of our building, and we're expanding that out to the 3rd district community. I think this is the time, Stan. I know I have a short window where I invite everybody to join us. And Kim, if you can share the slide, join us on September 16th. For our open house fundraiser. It will be emceed by Cynthia Newsom. Justin Schaefer will be our keynote speaker, talking about STEM and its impact on the community. Violinist Dominic Cammons will be here. And then the next slide, if we can show the honorary co-chairs. The honorary co-chairs of our event are Congressman Emanuel Cleaver, 3rd District Councilwoman Melissa Robinson, incoming, she's actually now the current superintendent for the Kansas City, Kansas Public Schools, the global telecom company managing partner Bambi George for Valorem Reply, and then HNTB Bridge Director and Senior Vice President Terza Gregory, and then our board chair, Chester Thompson. The reason that you see that as Adam is because that's how we operate. We work on both sides of the state line. That the honorary co-chairs represents government at the local, federal, state level, and then school districts, then tech, and then engineering. So hopefully you guys will join. It's going to be an amazing night. Thank you for having me. We're glad to sponsor Kevin. We've worked with him. He's a great speaker, and he's got big vision. And Ms. Herring, thank you for inviting us.
William, thank you so much. As you were talking, I went to my Outlook calendar and I added the September 16th fundraiser to my calendar, and I hope all of you will do the same. And I also just mentioned that in addition to that special event, check out the website. We'll get that. There's also, in addition to just learning about the many cool programs and partners that you're working with in the Kansas City community, there's also an opportunity to make a separate donation, if you so choose, to support this wonderful organization. As a self-proclaimed engineering nerd myself, I love how this community has really embraced STEM and specifically STEAM, adding arts to it as well, and promoting this as a career choice for the young people in our community from all different backgrounds. So William, thank you for the wonderful work that you do. And this is really why this is kind of a fun program today, is just the perfect segue. I know that you're on the board of directors of the Keystone Innovation District, William, and I'm now going to introduce Kevin McGinnis, who is the president and CEO of the Keystone Community Corporation, which is a nonprofit organization leading a bi-state regional initiative to plan, develop, and operate a thriving and diverse innovation community in downtown Kansas City. During the pandemic, Kevin also hosted a weekly webinar series for the Kansas City chapter of the Urban Land Institute called District Conversations, which featured a range of experts covering important issues related to creating a stronger and more inclusive development community in Kansas City. I had the opportunity to attend many of those, and those were fantastic conversations. Prior to Kevin's role leading the Keystone District, he was the CEO of Insight Media, a wholly owned big data and analytics subsidiary of Sprint Corporation. And during Kevin's tenure at Sprint, he also served as vice president of product. As a community leader, Kevin has twice been named to the Kansas City Business Journal's Power 100. And he is a driving force behind the creation of the Sprint Accelerator project in 2013 as founder and managing executive. And he has continued to be a champion for corporate engagement with the entrepreneurial community. Kevin has been a fixture in the Kansas City technology scene, serving as the board chair for the KC Tech Council for 4 years, and he currently serves on the Dean's Advisory Board at the University of Kansas Business School, as well as the Regional Advisory Council for the Greater Kansas City Community Foundation, and advisory boards for Digital Sandbox KC, ULI Kansas City, and CAPS Network, which is the Center for Advanced Professional Studies. Kevin holds a bachelor's degree in organizational communication from the University of Kansas, and he has also completed formal programs in executive leadership from Duke University and innovation and entrepreneurship from Stanford University. Whew, my goodness, that's a lot, Kevin. I look forward to, I'm glad you also have a degree in organizational communications, because I could never have composed anything quite so substantive as that. So, Kevin, I want to you. You spoke to us a few years ago about Keystone Innovation District when we were meeting in person. So this will be great to get an update, because I know a lot of things have been going on there. Reminder before you start, put your questions in the chat, and I'll monitor that throughout, and we'll get to that at the end for Q&A. So thank you, Kevin. Go ahead.
Thanks, Stan. Yeah, I'm tired after that introduction. That was a long one, but I appreciate it, and I appreciate being here. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to this group again. As you mentioned, I had the opportunity to talk to this group a little over 2 years ago, so a lot has transpired. I think one of the things I emphasized during that presentation at the luncheon was that this is a long-term project. So keep that in mind as I go through what we've accomplished between then and now, and also where we're going in the future. And I'll cover that towards the end of the presentation. But before I do, two things. One, I want to apologize for the shirt. I don't know if you guys are having the same visuals I'm having on the screen, but it's making me a little nauseous. So I apologize for picking the wrong shirt for today's presentation. Should have learned Zoom by now, what to do there. And number two, in my role when I was with, now T-Mobile, formerly Sprint, I had the opportunity to work in Silicon Valley a lot, work with a lot of the VC firms in Silicon Valley and talk to them about how they make decisions to invest in the companies that they see come through. And there was a phrase that I learned from some of the VCs there called, betting on jockeys and horses, right? And so they have to make a determination: are they betting on the jockey? Are they betting on the founder of the organization, the company, or are they betting on the horse, which is the actual product or the organization? I had the privilege, and I say this not just because he's here today, but I had the privilege of meeting William Wells. It was almost 3 years ago. And I can honestly tell you, in all of the engagement that we've had with Keystone throughout the community and the programs that we've looked at, if I was to say there's an organization where you should bet on the horse and the jockey, it's William Wells and what he's doing at Steam Village. They're making a tremendous impact. You talk to the kids, you talk to the parents, you talk to anybody who's engaged in the programming, and they can tell you that it's been a fantastic lift for the community. And I know he's had the opportunity to pull me into some of their conversations. I'm very grateful for that. But please go to the event, check out the website, donate to the organization, because they are doing fantastic work, and all of the support that we can bring them just helps him grow that organization. So thank you, William. I appreciate all that you're doing, and just wanted to make sure I gave you that praise here publicly, because you deserve it. So with that, let me get into the Keystone piece of this. Yeah, thanks, Rick. All right, so the update on Keystone, I'll walk you all through this present. Can everybody see that now? All right. So Keystone, from a vision perspective, just to kind of highlight, the journey that we've been on, I want to reiterate why we're doing this. When we look at the future, when we look at the future of work, the future of industry, the future of our region from an economic development perspective, it's our belief that this next industrial revolution must include equity and access for all. So that is one of the key pillars. We'll talk about our imperatives in a minute. The second thing that we believe, and the second reason that we're doing this, is we believe the Kansas City region is very uniquely positioned to lead the world in groundbreaking innovations, whether it's the strength that we have in architecture and engineering, infrastructure, new built environment, sustainable solutions for the future, whether it's the work that we do in the life sciences community around both human and animal health, population health management, translational medicine, or biologics, the emerging field of pharmaceutical manufacturing, distribution, and so on, which is extremely important, as we've all learned over the last 18 months. And then supply chain and logistics, our central location in the country, our ability to focus on advanced manufacturing, our ability to focus on transportation, the surrounding logistics infrastructure, and on cybersecurity related to all of these things. These are all areas where Kansas City has a leadership position, or has the opportunity to lead and really break ground on new innovations. It's going to require us to work together. And so one of the things that we believe is that we can come up with the solutions that the world is waiting for if we have the opportunity to bring people together. And so when we talk about bringing people together, we think of innovation, and the way we've seen the future of innovation is that it's not a solo act, right? It requires collaboration. It requires cross-industry collaboration to develop things like autonomous vehicles. There are 8 or 9 different industries that have to come together now to create a new vehicle. When we think about the innovations in any of these areas, architecture, engineering, and construction, these are all traditionally siloed expertise or siloed industries that need to come together as we look at the next generation of infrastructure and innovations in the new built environment. When we look at the implications of some of the social challenges we face, there needs to be better collaboration between the for-profit community and the nonprofit community, right, to create more sustainable models in the social venture domain. There needs to be better for workforce development, for growing the talent that we need to grow our economy and grow the businesses here in Kansas City. There needs to be better integration and better collaboration between academia, our research institutions, our workforce development organizations, and those industry players that they work with and serve. And so these opportunities to work together, it really just defines that this is not a solo act. The obstacles that we face are enormous, and no one company or institution can solve these challenges. We have what we need within this region, this bi-state region that is Kansas City. We just need the opportunity to bring these groups together, ensure that these things are interconnected, and create these sustainable ways, a sustainable means of collaborating, create new pathways to bring together experts and innovators, whether it's the latest in science, the most intriguing startups, our neighborhood leaders, our schools, our investors, or any of our established brands. All of them have real problems to solve, and the best path to do that is together. So these are at the foundation and the core of what we believe. We have made some investments. So since the last time we talked, which was a little over 2 years ago, we have done some things to ensure that we're following best practices. We engaged an organization through the Civic Council of Greater Kansas City called HR&A Advisors out of New York City. And actually the principal who worked with us on the market study is the former CEO of Research Triangle Park. So he knows a little bit about innovation districts or university research parks or how you bring these practices together. And we did an innovation feasibility study and an innovation district market assessment in 2019, published that in January of 2019. So as we moved into 2020, or as we moved into the middle of 2019, we started to get a lot of questions about governance, a lot of questions about what are the best practices to make decisions and to do community engagement and to ensure that you have the right representation at the table. And so the Kauffman Foundation provided us a grant. We brought HR&A advisors back and did an exhaustive set of stakeholder interviews throughout the region. And then they looked at best practices around the country, whether it was multi-state, whether it was multi-university, multi-city, regardless of where these things were located in the regions that they were in. What are the best practices that we see around governance and leadership and those types of things? And we published a governance strategy report. It's available on the Civic Council website right before Thanksgiving of 2019. And so this is the playbook that we've been following since the end of 2019 to really kind of drive the what we call first 3 years of execution for the Keystone District. I'll go through our timeline. We're actually in year 4 of the initiative. It's hard for me to believe that we've survived that long, but we have a long way to go. So who are we? The Keystone Community Corporation, as Stan outlined in the introduction, we're an independent 501c3. It's one of the key best practices that we've seen across the country in bringing these things together. We're a nonprofit that was created in 2018 to bring together our universities, bring together government and corporate interests, and bring together the interests of community in an independent view of the world to drive the planning, the development, the community engagement, and the operations of this diverse and thriving innovation community that we hope to develop in downtown Kansas City. So what we call our keystones, our imperatives, there's really 3 of them: that our board, our subcommittees, and all of our stakeholders who are engaged in this program, that they really live by if you're going to become a Keystone partner or stakeholder. And the first one, that this is not a real estate project. Everybody sees it as real estate. It requires physical development and placemaking, but really it's the programming and the placemaking principles that drive those successful outcomes. And we've seen this across the nation as we visited other innovation districts, other innovation communities throughout the country. It's really, if the programming drives these requirements and drives these outcomes, that's where you have the type of success that we're talking about. This is also by state, regional initiative. It needs to live in a place, so it therefore lives in a city. And we think the best place for that programming to be most successful is the location that we've identified with Keystone. But this is an opportunity for us to bring together assets and stakeholders from across the bi-state region. And it's going to require that cooperation and engagement that I talked about for us to be most successful. And then the last one is that this has to be something that is built on the pillars of equity and inclusion. So for us to be successful, for us to look at any of the outcomes that we talk about with Keystone, the planning, development, and operations of this district have to be built on the pillars of providing a more equitable future in tech and venture, providing a more inclusive community, and really driving the cornerstones of diversity and inclusion in all that we do. From the dirt up, we talk about equity. So place. Right, as I mentioned, this is all about programming, but it's a placemaking initiative. How do you create that sustainable path for people to come together, that sustainable opportunity for all of these innovators and experts and entrepreneurs to drive entrepreneurial density, to bring the right innovators together? It requires place. And so the location that we had identified was this 18th Street corridor that sits between the East Crossroads and the historic 18th and Vine Cultural District, that sits between Hospital Hill on the south, adjacent to Hospital Hill, and then you have the Central Business District, the East Village, and some of those areas that are to our north. It has excellent regional transit connectivity. It's walkable to all of the areas that we just described. Proximity to creative class is one of the key elements for any of these successful innovation communities. Mixed use, So it's not a business park. It's not just a university research park. This needs to be an 18-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week type of neighborhood. And so we need to really have that in mind as we develop the framework for this over the next decade. There are lots of infill opportunities throughout this district, and there are lots of amazing anchors and institutions that live within the footprint of what we consider the Keystone District today. And we need to keep those things in mind as we develop out the community. And this is also aligned to the multiple strategic investments that the city has made, the private industry and our universities have already made. I mentioned a few of those. We're honored and privileged to be working with 18th and Vine Developers Roundtable right now. And so the group of developers who are working in West Vine and 18th and Vine and South Vine right now, working with them to connect the strategic investments that are being made in that community. Working with Children's Mercy Hospital, the new research facility. They've joined us as one of our strategic partners, and Rob Steele has joined our board. And so the new research facility and the adjacency to the research capabilities and the focus on life sciences on Hospital Hill. And then obviously the strategic investment that's been made for decades in the Crossroads and to revitalize our downtown fabric. So our journey today, so as I mentioned, we started in 2018 with the market assessment and feasibility study. That first year was really spent answering the question, can we do this in Kansas City? Does Kansas City need an innovation community? Can we sustain one with all of the headwinds that we have as a region? And I'll be honest about those things, like the state line, things like the fragmentation in our innovation community, the fragmentation between our university systems. It doesn't act like a true regional higher ed collaboration because we have political divisions and different board of regents and different types of structures at that higher ed level that prevents the type of collaboration that you would see in a city that doesn't have a state line that runs through it. We have tremendous socioeconomic boundaries and divisions and historical fragmentation in the community. So we really spent that first year answering the question, can we and should we do this in Kansas City? We started our civic engagement and we did the location selection. So as we moved, and that was right about the time that I had presented to this group for the first time. So as we moved into 2019, it was really getting those anchor institutions engaged and committed to the project on a long-term basis. And I'll talk a little bit about who they are as we move forward. Really going through and what determines the successful outcomes, how do we get community engagement started? That's an evergreen process, and it will be something that we continue to focus on every day and every year as we move forward. And then we developed a shared leadership model. This can't be one person. This can't be one organization. This can't just be Keystone driving this initiative forward. So we've stood up a board of directors. We faithfully announced our board of directors on March 11th, 2020. If you don't remember that date, you probably remember March 12th because that was the day they canceled the Big 12 tournament. And everybody told me I picked the wrong year to start a placemaking initiative. But we've developed the board of directors. We have a broad set of representation, not just from our higher ed partners, but from the civic community, from the corporate community, and from the surrounding neighborhoods and communities. We've stood up 3 subcommittees to help us really kind of fill out the expertise and provide that expert engagement that we need to continue to move this project forward. So as we moved into 2020, as the pandemic set in, really became kind of an opportunity for Keystone to take a big step back from the headwinds when people would say this is a real estate project and you're focused on real estate development. We have to take place off the table. So the year of 2020, we spent really focused on stakeholder activation. We stood up the Standing Committee for Research and Advanced Studies, which is leadership from our 9 higher ed institutions. They met weekly from June until November of 2020, which is very hard for me to believe, considering they were all in the middle of a pandemic. We also started, like I mentioned, the Community Development Subcommittee, and we continued to work on community development and continue to build relationships and help people understand what is an innovation district. Listen to what are the needs of the community and what are the things that this development and this community, what are the innovations, what are the problems and challenges we face at a very basic neighborhood level that having these innovation resources might be able to help with. We started programming development. So we created strategic relationships with VMLY&R to start an organization called Keystone Labs in October of 2020. Talk about that in a minute. I mentioned the relationship with Children's Mercy Hospital. The Downtown Council, we've been working with them on the Imagine Downtown 2030 plan. We've been working with Climate Action KC in the recent launch of the Building Energy Exchange. We have some programming that's coming forward related to sustainable infrastructure and related to some of these key climate resiliency, sustainable approaches to not just new built environment on the commercial side, but how do we impact resiliency in affordable housing and in our community, surrounding communities. We also developed a relationship with KC Global Design, our architecture, engineering, and construction group, and we're helping on the innovation path for those 9 organizations that are now part of the membership there. And then we've developed a relationship with an organization out of Atlanta, Georgia, called Opportunity Hub. They came here in 2019 and started some pilot programming. They were brought here by the EDC, and I've been able to really work with Rodney Sampson, their founder, to create a new approach to innovation districts and what OHUB calls an equity district. And we're really looking to to bring that programming here in full as we end 2020 and move into 2021, and use that as a framework. Actually, this should be the headquarters for all of the equity district approaches that OHUB is taking around the country. This was founded here, and we have the greatest opportunity to bring that programming here in Kansas City. So I'll talk a little bit about programming now, since that is really kind of the feature of where we've been focused for the last year, and really what drives the successful outcomes for an innovation district. And it's really about creating intersections. Like, we can say we're going to focus on startup programming and drive startup density, or we can say we're going to focus on our university partners and grow research and grow commercialization or workforce development. We can say we can go work on behalf of our industry partners to improve product delivery, improve innovations, and drive, hopefully, economic growth through our industry players. Or we can say we're going to focus on community. But the goal of an innovation district is to bring all of these stakeholders together in a mutually beneficial way and create intersections that don't often exist between these stakeholders on a day-to-day basis. And it's really going to be driven by programming that we've created in each of these sectors to drive them together and to really create bonds between them, as I mentioned, that wouldn't otherwise exist. So I mentioned our universities. So these are the 9 institutions. We'll be growing this number, but these are the 9 institutions who we are looking to bring into Kansas City's urban core. Several of them are in the Kansas City Metro today: Kansas City Art Institute, UMKC, Metropolitan Community College. Some of them, KCU, Kansas City University. Some of them are in the region and really look at Kansas City as their urban core and their opportunity to collaborate more closely with industry to really understand how the impact of their universities or their institutions can be made in an urban setting and in a collaborative environment with, honestly, some of their competitors. And we think that that is the change that needs to happen at the institutional level. They see innovation, a broken business model, ineffective commercialization of research, a lack of efficacy in terms of how they're doing workforce development. We have so many civic organizations and others who are looking at this problem. We think one of those solutions is simply place. Having people who are co-located, having people who have the opportunity to talk in a more informal setting on a day-to-day basis over the course of time will help us drive better connections, basically call it the synapse of our innovation brain here in the region, to help prepare our region to be more resilient to future challenges that we might face, or where are we going from the future of work. These institutions that we're talking about bringing into the urban core, while some might say higher ed isn't very innovative today, it's the environment that they create with their students and with their research expertise that really creates the catalyst for innovation in most of the successful innovation markets that we've seen throughout the world. So this group of institutions is extremely important in what we're trying to accomplish. And over the last year, we've been helping, working with them to understand what are their desires and where do they think they can build new things. How do we go after additional dollars to bring into this market through grants, through ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act that the EDA has just put out, through the innovation bill, the innovation part of the infrastructure bill. That is money that without this collaboration, without these opportunities, might not be available to Kansas City. And so how can these new collaborations bring those resources to this market? Keystone Labs, right? So that's the university side. And how do we bring them in and integrate them into the fabric of this community? On the corporate side, the industry side, our lack of corporate engagement, there's a couple of things that cause that as we looked at the landscape over the last 5 to 10 years. One of those is we have such a diverse industry set. There aren't natural connections between a lot of our major industry players in Kansas City because they just serve different customers. They serve different market segments. But that innovation that we're talking about is really you have to break those silos down and start to get these groups together. And so one of the things that we wanted to do was create a platform, create an entity that allows them to sit at the table with each other and talk about those innovation challenges, identify their major problems and see where they can help each other out. And how do we bring those resources to the other parts of the stakeholder group, to our entrepreneurs, to the community, and to our academic partners. And so we created Keystone Labs in October of 2020 with VMLY&R. It's really a studio model that's built on 3 different studios. The first one we call our ideation studio. It's really about how do corporations, how does industry better engage the global startup community. So these could be accelerators or incubators. They could be just different challenges that we throw out and try to build the connectivity between large and small. How do we better support those startups here in Kansas City and here in the region through those industry relationships as distribution partners, as platform partners, as customers? The second studio we call our collaboration studio. This is where we bring maybe community-based challenges. The first 4 pilot projects were really focused on things like health outcomes, focused on alternative paths for workforce, focused on things that were probably not business challenges as much as they were community challenges, but how do we bring those resources together and provide that footprint, that process for these industry players to collaborate more with each other or collaborate with our university partners. The Powered by VMLY&R opportunity here, VMLY&R has stepped in. The whole concept of this district, since we have so many disparate industry players at the table, is built on the opportunity around design. Our historical strengths in design, our trade sector strengths in architecture, this history of Kansas City as being kind of a design center. So how do we use design thinking and human-centered design as the key to that collaboration studio? And then our last studio is the growth studio. And this is one that we'll look at as we move forward, and how do we improve commercialization across the region with our industry partners, with our university partners. And so that one we haven't spent as much time. We're focused on the other 2. And so this is a great opportunity for us in terms of bringing together. We have 15 founding members in Keystone Labs. It's just the beginning. We're kind of still in that prototyping year since most of the programming has been virtual. And we're looking forward to starting to get our members together in person as we move into the end of 2020 here. We've had some in-person meetings recently, and you start to see exponential impact and success when these people are building better relationships face-to-face. In November of 2020, right after we announced Keystone Labs and we've got the foundation to bring industry into the picture, we announced the partnership with Launch KC. So Launch KC, many of you probably know the history, started as a grant competition for 4 years with the EDC and Downtown Council. And then they moved into the opportunity to start to drive corporate accelerators. Well, we think this is an opportunity to bring an ecosystem of talent through the universities, an ecosystem of innovation, and our industry players to the table to create ecosystem approaches, multiple corporate sponsors, multiple players within an ecosystem like fintech or like life sciences, bring them into play and create a stronger presence. So do a better job of connecting our industry to these global startup opportunities. Also develop entrepreneurial density. By putting these different programs in a specific place, you start to drive entrepreneurial density, more startups in a neighborhood, more startups in a specific community. And that has been proven through research to drive greater access to capital and more investment from the VC community and from the private equity community. So it hopefully brings more money into the region through driving that entrepreneurial density. And then it also allows us to leverage a shared resource model. Anytime that you run a program like this and you ask for one partner to fund the whole thing, it becomes extremely challenging, especially in a market like Kansas City where we have the level of fragmentation that we have. So this allows us to share resources. This allows us to share cost expense, investment expense, and to really accelerate and create greater outcomes through that shared resource model. And so we're excited about the opportunity to relaunch Launch KC, if you will. We've announced Brush Creek Partners has announced their second cohort for the InsurTech Accelerator, and we'll be announcing more accelerators in the coming months focused on some of these other industry sectors that I mentioned previously. So where are we going in the future? Where is Keystone headed going forward? We've already talked a little bit about what we've done in 2018, 2019, and 2020. As we move into 2021, and as we think about where we're going for the next 2 to 3 years, there's a couple of areas of focus that are highlighted here on this slide, and I'll talk about. The first one is we have to grow organizational capacity. So we have to have more resource within the nonprofit infrastructure. We need a community development director, someone who can spend every day waking, from the moment they wake up until they call it a day, whenever that might be, focused on developing this community, bringing together our various community stakeholders, making sure that the art community and the creative class is an integral part of what we're doing, ensuring that our neighborhood relationships, and ensuring that we are really moving forward with the community benefits that we've pledged as part of this innovation district. So we need to make sure that we have the right resources and that we have the right investment in that area. Partnerships. So we have 9 universities. They are all very siloed, and it's an extremely challenging initiative to get them together, but most of the work with them is going to happen individually. So we need a resource to really help us drive the work at the institutional level with those universities and those higher education partners. Opportunity Hub, Children's Mercy Hospital, some of our strategic partners, and we need the infrastructure in place to work with the government entities, whether it's in the city, Missouri, or whether it's the state governments in the bi-state region and the support we're looking for, or the amazing opportunity that we have in front of us with the federal investment that's being made. And Kansas City has an opportunity to be at the forefront of that through this conversation, through the infrastructure bill, the innovation portion of that, the United States Innovation and Competitiveness Act of 2021. There's $7 billion that's going to be distributed amongst 18 regional technology hubs, and Keystone gives Kansas City a good opportunity to be at the table, to be one of those 18 regional technology hubs that gets this investment. And so we really need the organizational capacity to be able to go after that money for Kansas City, for the community, and for the innovators and the entrepreneurs here in the region. Advancing community engagement. We have been fortunate to have partners who have pulled us into their community engagement process. So William, during his introduction, talked about their VCAP, their virtual community action planning process that they went through with the 18th and Vine Policy Development Committee and the UMKC. And we were fortunate to participate in those workshops and hear the needs of the community and to be an active participant in those. Downtown Council, the focus groups that they ran through the Imagine Downtown 2030 plan, we've learned a tremendous amount. Our day-to-day community engagement, but we need to formalize this. We need to grow the resources that we have focused on listening and working alongside the community to develop this neighborhood. Execute programming. We've got some exciting programming that's launching this fall. So we have labs that will continue to grow. We have Launch KC programming that we'll be bringing out. We have a couple other programs, a community innovation plus design studio. We have something called Keystone Sessions, which is the opportunity to bring folks together on a weekly basis around a range of topics. All of that programming needs to be executed well for us to be successful. So we'll have to focus in on that in 2021 as we move forward. And then expanding our strategic partnerships. This is all about co-creation. Again, this is, I lean kind of into my software development background of how you develop successful platforms. You don't rebuild everything custom. You reuse what's there. So we have amazing programs and amazing opportunities to build more partnerships in Kansas City by creating place and bringing those resources together. We have the opportunity to attract new partnerships into the region using this as a magnet or as a draw. Opportunities like Opportunity Hub, opportunities that we've looked at through Climate Action KC and strategic partners that are looking at Kansas City differently because of these collaborations that we can create. And so how do we continue to grow that portfolio of strategic partners that are looking at Kansas City and really at the table as we develop this? And then the last piece I'll talk about is our placemaking strategies. So as we moved into, through the pandemic, and as we're starting to talk about place again and starting to bring people back together, we're starting to look at kind of a phased strategy around that placemaking piece. So I'll say we're very excited to be able to be in our first location this fall. So we're looking at our first location along 18th Street. It'll be kind of an interim landing spot for us with one of our strategic partners. We're excited about announcing that here in the coming weeks. And we'll be bringing some of this programming in person to people. We'll be doing community charrettes, and we'll be bringing our partners together and creating those binds that we think in-person placemaking is really all about. We're also looking at a couple of strategic developments. One is a large renovation project along 18th Street of an existing facility. And the other one is a new built environment. This was announced back in 2018 that continues to move forward. That's on the northeast corner of 18th and Troost in partnership with J.E. Dunn Capital Partners and KCATA. And that development has morphed a little throughout the pandemic. It's looking at some of the requirements and some of the feedback that we've received on what would be needed and what would be beneficial to have in the community. And so we'll be rolling out those new plans in the coming months as well. And then we have a couple of smaller projects. We're pleased to be partnering with Shamari Benton and Erica Bryce and the team on the Wheatley Provident Hospital renovation that they're doing. It's in the footprint of the district, just south of the 18th and Troost location that we've been looking at and working on. And then we've been working on a couple of smaller projects that are a little further east. And as I mentioned earlier, and I just want to reiterate, we're honored to be at the table with the 18th and Vine Developers Roundtable and to be able to bring the infrastructure investment from Keystone to help support the amazing work that's being done by developers like Kelvin Simmons, Alan Gray, and the work that the folks are doing at 20th and Vine, Shamari Benton, Jason Parson, Kemet's announced a new brewery down there. So it's fantastic to be part of that placemaking strategy. And we really see the vibrancy of this community really helping add to the investment that's being made by those developers to our east. And then, as I mentioned, the work that's happening on Hospital Hill and the continued build out of Hospital Hill, our ability to complement that through entrepreneurial density, through our university relationships that we're bringing to the table, and some of the other things that Keystone has planned from a commercialization growth perspective to bring that research to market and keep those benefits in Kansas City and grow those to promote economic development and economic mobility for a new group of people is something that's exciting and part of that strategic relationship we have from a placemaking perspective as well. So that's really, that was the presentation for today. I just wanted to give everybody kind of an update on where things were with Keystone, kind of some of the progress we've made. We're working on kind of, I'll call it relaunching the messaging and some of the branding based on all the things we've learned over the last 3 years. And with that, we'll also create more consistent communication platforms. I talk to a lot of people on a one-on-one basis or on a small group basis every day, and we really need to further the communication on a more broad basis. And so we'll be doing things like reworking our website to include more information on a more frequent basis. As we launch our programming, you'll see more frequent communication that'll come out through our social channels, but also through our community partners. Because one of our goals, I mentioned a project called Keystone Sessions, or a program that we're working on called Keystone Sessions. It's really how do you bring together 15 to 20 different community organizations to co-create that programming, and then they all become owners and communicators into their respective affinity communities or respective communities about the work that's happening to bring the outcomes and bring the group together. So we look forward to those things. I would probably expect, if I were you, I'd probably expect to see more of that ramp up in communication as we get towards the first of the year and into first quarter of 2022. So with that, Stan, I don't know, Stan and Kim, if we have time for questions from the group. If you have any that were in the chat, I'd be happy to.
We absolutely do have time for questions. So again, I'll just remind everyone and encourage you all to put any questions in the chat. Kevin, I'm curious because I like this notion that you started with, because it's not a real estate project. That this is about building connections, but it is place centered. There's a place building piece to it, and you talked about all the different partnerships you're building and profit and nonprofit, universities, healthcare. Maybe talk a little bit about what it's been like trying to break down some of those government silos, and because you brought up the by-state challenge. And so it's not just Kansas and Missouri, but we've got, umpteen number of different, communities. What has that been like? What kind of conversations and reception are you getting from local government and perhaps state government as well?
That's a great question, Stan. It's not been, how do I say this? well, I'll just say it. There are certainly headwinds that come and go as the political winds blow different directions, right? And so when we started, there was, I think, a newfound desire to see bi-state collaboration, the end of the border war from an incentives or economic development perspective. Winds shift a little bit, and certain things transpire on the political landscape and political spectrum that might create more tensions in those areas. And so having to navigate those things, you have to make sure that our political leaders understand that this is about the people that live in this city. And if we keep splitting things in this city, it's not good for the people that live here. And so this is an opportunity for us to create economic development on both sides of the state line, regardless of where this project is. And I think people hear that and they see the stakeholders that are at the table who are making an attempt to do that. They see that that's the desire and that's the case, and I think it really helps there. But it's certainly been difficult. And it will continue to be one of our challenges. This is, I mentioned at the beginning, this is a long-term project. And we'll probably see, throughout the life of this, Cortex in St. Louis, one of our peer districts that we would, they're 19 years old, right? They've survived multiple mayors and multiple congressional leaders in the St. Louis region. And, you have to continue to sustain through those things. So, we will continue to kind of march ahead, and we've got our imperatives that we think are apolitical. They don't have anything to do with political parties or state lines or boundaries. If anything, we're trying to erase some of those historic divisions in the city. And that's really what drives the stakeholders for Keystone.
Good. Well, one thing that certainly is not apolitical and is in the news now is the $1 trillion infrastructure bill, which just passed through the Senate. Cynthia asked a question about that, and she wants to know, do you plan to bid for those funds, and how would you use those funds? I think you touched on infrastructure and resiliency and all that, because this is a much more broader, bill than just roads and bridges. So maybe talk a little bit about how this could impact and be an opportunity.
Yeah, it's a great question. Thanks, Cynthia. So think of the infrastructure bill as being in two parts for this conversation. There is your traditional infrastructure, and we've seen in the news some of the earmarks that were designated for the Kansas City region, and that's related to roads and bridges and some of what we would consider our more traditional transportation or infrastructure and so on. And so we support those things, and we look forward to those things happening in the region, and hopefully some of the innovation we're working on can help drive the allocation of those funds. The bucket we've been focusing on is different. And there were two acts that were put forward in 2019. One was called the Endless Frontier Act, and the other was called the Innovation Centers Acceleration Act, I think it was called. And those are really driven by the fact that all of the federal investment in innovation in the United States has been on the coasts. It's really been tied up into about 5 cities on our 2 coasts. And so how do we, the unofficial name of this legislation as it moved through in 2020 was called the China Response Bill. So how do we improve our competitiveness on a global scale around innovation? The federal government has a long history in investing in innovation and being the catalyst for innovation strengths in the country. And so that bill was built around that. And so we've actually been at the table since late last year, and I say we, the Kansas City Region, Civic Council, Mid-America Regional Council, the Chamber, Keystone, have been at the table driving the requirements and helping the Department of Commerce really kind of understand where this money can be leveraged and where this money can be spent, and building the requirements on how they'll select these cities. Now, the cities aren't in the bill, so we still have some work to do. There's going to be a competitive process, so Kansas City might not even make the list. Currently, when you look at the way they rank cities, we're below the line. So opportunities like Keystone actually strengthen our ability to do that. So that's one piece of it. We're working on positioning Kansas City to get the money, any of the funds that might come forward. And as I mentioned, it's $7 billion over the 5 years from 22 to 26 that will be split amongst those 18 cities. And I don't know that it'll be split evenly. So we put forward an initial group or initial kind of view of where the money could go. And it goes into really 3 buckets. And the first one is infrastructure. And so this would be the kind of infrastructure that William was talking about: digital infrastructure, innovation infrastructure. It's not your traditional roads and some of those types of things, but it can be used for that. So we're talking about streetscape improvements, if we're talking about stormwater and wastewater management solutions. And this is where the partnership with the 18th and Vine teams will help, because if we can bring that money to the table and use that as part of the underpinning for their development projects, that just improves everybody, right? So that part of the innovation infrastructure is something we've been focused on. The second bucket is facilities. These are new lab capabilities, collaboration spaces, incubator spaces, the things that you would consider innovation facilities, workforce development community spaces, spaces for our art community to be an active part of what we're doing with Keystone. As I mentioned, they're an extremely important part. That funding will be extremely important, because then that's funding that could come to the nonprofit, and we can ensure those spaces are available long-term for what we call innovation intermediaries. So it doesn't just become about commercial development and about the commercial growth, and we push these valuable members of a community like this. So that's where that funding from our perspective would go into what we would call community spaces. And then the last bucket of funding in that infrastructure piece is around specifically programming. And so this is where community engagement will really help us drive. What are those requirements around programming? Can we provide additional funds to organizations like Keystone Village or MindDrive, or to the work that is happening in real world learning with Kansas City Public Schools? Can we help build up some of that programming? Can we grow the existing programming we have to bring resources into this district and provide additional access, more equitable access to things like research and science-based companies, right? Like, how do we grow the workforce? How do we grow the access to fourth industrial revolution jobs from, historically excluded communities? So there's a huge programming list of things that will, once we get the money, we'll figure out which of those programs it starts to go to. But we've been working across our stakeholder groups and across the community to start to identify what some of those possibilities and opportunities are. So that's a long-winded way of saying we're not sure exactly. We have a list, and we think we have a great plan. We just need to make sure Kansas City gets the money. That's the first objective for us.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Not only answering, but just going into kind of detail and history behind the process there. As you were talking this afternoon, and I've had the opportunity to be involved with KC Global Design, and I'm a hometown champion cheerleader for architecture and engineering and construction industry. It's easy to feel like we're unique, and we do have some very unique opportunities here in this in Kansas City with the strength of that industry, with our university hubs, with healthcare, talented workforce. But you touched on, where this may be happening in other parts of the country. I think Cortex in St. Louis, and earlier we talked about Opportunity Hub. And Colette asked the question if you could speak more about the OHUB partnership. OHUB is currently working with the KC Chamber on an initiative to bring more people of color to C-suite and for-profit board positions. Can you talk a little bit about the partnership there to Colette's question?
Sure. Thanks, Colette. So when Rodney and I first met, we were on polar opposites of this conversation. Rodney, rightfully so, when you look at innovation density, when it's created, it creates greater income segregation. That's kind of the historical view of this. And after many conversations and lots of understanding about motivations and goals, how do we create a different narrative around that? How do we create a different approach and use the approach that Rodney and Del Gines at the Kansas City Fed have laid out their inclusive pyramid, their inclusive ecosystems pyramid? How do we take that foundation and instill it into what we're doing here? So it starts with early socialization, skills development, all of these things that need to precede innovation, entrepreneurship, and access to capital, those types of things. And so we'll start with a lot of programming there. Things like he did with Third Fridays. I got to attend a lot of those events. The diversity accelerator flow that he has in terms of bringing people through and helping them understand from an educational perspective and an awareness perspective, how does venture capital work? And how do I start a company? And how do I evaluate mentors? All of that type of work. So there's a lot of just foundational pieces that Opportunity Hub will bring. And if there's one thing I've learned about inclusive ecosystems: representation matters. I can have the best intent, but if there aren't people who look like you and come from your background and aren't engaged in the same experiences as you, there's really cultural headwinds in trying to bring those programs. And so Rodney and Opportunity Hub helps us answer some of those questions. It's funny you mentioned that RFP, or the opportunity to do the C-suite board. I was actually running that RFP response around for Rodney at the very last minute, trying to get it to the right folks to make sure. So that's something that Rodney and I partnered on. And that the answer there is a talent placement opportunity in all of our corporate members in Kansas City as they try to grow more diverse talent. A lot of them come up with the first answer is we don't know where to look. Like the places we traditionally recruit, and that it becomes, I don't want to say it just because I don't have the words right now, becomes an excuse to not bring diverse talent into the ecosystem. And so what we've worked on with Rodney is the opportunity in his relationships with all the HBCUs and his relationship with talent placement agencies that focus on, BIPOC talent across the country. How do we use that as an opportunity to bring talent into Kansas City? We got a lot of feedback that if we started at the entry level, that we might not have as much impact and traction. So let's start at the top. Like if we can help these organizations that are looking to have more diverse board representation, and we can use Opportunity Hub to partner with existing organizations in Kansas City, like Black Excellence KC and others who are really trying to identify and elevate that talent as well. Let's start there and play that out. And then let's move into middle management and the executive ranks. OHUB has successfully placed a couple executives at a local bank here in Kansas City already, right? So we have advocates and we have champions who said, look, this works. And so that's where we're kind of starting on the talent placement side. We have a lot of work to do to get Opportunity Hub funded here in Kansas City. Similar challenge that a lot of us in the nonprofit space have. But we're hopeful that is going to happen as we really kind of build out that programming here at the first of the year. So it's kind of an ecosystem building opportunity. We'd like to create some spaces with Opportunity Hub, some co-working spaces that are Black owned and specifically for BIPOC communities, because the ones we have today aren't culturally built for that. So how do we change that as well? And we think Opportunity Hub is the right partner to do that. And my commitment to the chamber and to the civic council and to the others is to make sure that Rodney's integrated with our local organizations, that we're not coming in and bringing an outside organization in to replace those organizations or compete with them. So working with folks like Dan Smith at Porterhouse KC, or as I mentioned, working with the folks over at Black Excellence KC, how do we integrate into the existing programs that might not have the strength at a national level in tech and venture to grow and build them up using Opportunity Hub as a platform to do that. So I know that, again, long-winded answer. I hope that answered your question, but we think it is a really key strategic partnership for what we're trying to accomplish from an equity perspective, an inclusion perspective here in Kansas City.
That's fantastic. And the equity and inclusion and diversity conversation is just so critical in all facets of our community and across the country as well. William, you put a comment in the chat, and I know we're getting near the top of the hour, but I wanted to invite you the opportunity if you'd like to expand on that. It's a free conversation here.
Oh, well, I didn't really want to expand on it, but since you've given me the microphone.
Too late, yeah.
When I listen to everybody talking about broadband, and we've been talking about the digital divide for 20 years, right? And it's usually centered around connectivity, devices, and hotspots, right? And to me, the conversation has never been about how do you get people into the economy? How do you utilize and adopt so you can get into the economy? And so, I think that I like to be careful, and Kevin and I have had this conversation several times. We're trying to teach people how to fish and not teach them to get fish. And we don't want people to be looked at as victims, because there's a lot of talent that's not being realized because the access is not being given and low bars are being set. So I just encourage all of us to look at raising the bar. There are some organizations that would do better if they were funded directly, because they are doing impact and they are doing real work, as opposed to having a third party be the person that gets the funding and then they send it out and then, of course, take off the administrative fees across the top. The money never gets to problem in the source that's actually solving the problem.
Wonderful, well said. Well, we are at 1 o'clock. I want to thank you all again for joining us. Kevin, William, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful, not just presentation, a great conversation. You know, we've been doing the Zoom thing here at Casey Downtowners for probably a year and a half, and we're so anxious to get back together. But one thing is that we have this format, we could connect, and I like how this has really just sort of become a conversation platform. So thank you. Please, everyone stay tuned as always to emails, our website, social media channels. We'll be back on September the 8th, I believe, if we got that right, second Wednesday, for another great program. So until then, everyone, take care, be safe, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you all again.